Leon Springs, Texas, is a small community located just northwest of San Antonio, where Nichol Olsen lived in a quiet, upscale neighborhood with her children and boyfriend. The morning of January 10th, 2019, Nicole's boyfriend, Charles Wheeler, claimed he couldn't get a hold of anyone in the family, and upon returning to the house to investigate, found Nicole and her two daughters dead of gunshot wounds. The medical examiner ruled Olsen's death a suicide and the deaths of the two girls homicides. 5 years later, there are still more questions than answers in this family tragedy. Hello, and welcome to Box in the Basement podcast. I'm your host, Arlene.
And I'm Leah.
In 1996, my world was shattered when my uncle Leon Laureles was shot execution style in a small town in Texas. To this day, his murder remains unsolved, and the pain of that injustice continues to haunt me, my family, and Leon's friends and coworkers. Here at Box in the Basement, we want to shed light on the overwhelming number of unsolved murders and disappearances here in Texas and beyond. We want to bring awareness to the lesser-known cases that got little to no attention in hopes that someone listening will come forward with any information, because we strongly believe all lives matter. Ultimately, we want to get justice for Leon and for all the victims whose cases are sitting, collecting dust in a box in a basement. Please note that this episode contains depictions of violence that some people may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Please like and follow our pages on all social media platforms for Box in the Basement Podcast and Justice for Leon Laureles. And now you can also find us on YouTube.
In 2019, the U.S.-China trade war raged on. Violence and poverty in Central America caused tens of thousands of migrants to seek asylum in the U.S. Loggers and farmers burned the Amazon rainforest at record rates. Religious nationalism took hold in India, and massive pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong splashed across front pages around the world. I was looking for some big pop culture moments to kind of balance out all the doom and gloom, but it turns out 2019 was kind of lame in that regard. The U.S. women's soccer team won its 4th World Cup. That's about it. Lots of movie sequels and reboots and celebrity feuds. Oh, and the celebrity college admissions cheating scandal. Almost forgot about that. The week of January 10th, 2019, Ariana Grande's Thank You Next topped the Billboard Hot 100, and Speechless by Dan and Shay was at the top of the country charts. Aquaman was number 1 at the box office that week, and The Reckoning by John Grisham topped the New York Times bestseller list. Leon Springs, Texas, is an unincorporated community about 19 miles northwest of San Antonio, just off Interstate 10. German settlers put down roots in the area in the mid-19th century, opening a small general store and a horse-changing station that eventually became a key stop on the Jackass stagecoach route that ran from San Antonio to San Diego, California. Stagecoaches gave way to railroads, and railroads gave way to cars and interstates. San Antonio grew, and the population of Little Leon Springs hovered around 100 people until after 2000, when suburban sprawl found its way to the northwest side of San Antonio. Upscale housing developments cropped up near grocery stores and luxury car dealerships, and the population steadily increased to its current number of around 10,000 residents.
Nichol Layla Olsen was born on May 27, 1981, in California to parents Rick and Mick Sherrill. The family eventually moved to San Antonio, Texas, and Nichol graduated from James Madison High School, where she was known for being friendly and popular amongst her peers. Nichol lost both of her parents young. Her father died in 1988 when she was just 7, and her mother passed away in 2001. Nichol went on to cosmetology school and worked at a high-end salon on the north side of San Antonio, where she was immensely popular and in high demand. She had 3 children, a son, Skylar, and 2 daughters, Alexa and London. And by all accounts, she was a devoted and caring mother. Nichol was close to her remaining family and especially loved spending time with them around the holidays, cooking, playing games, and talking. When she wasn't busy working and being a mom, Nichol was a fitness enthusiast, and she loved attending Bible study and hanging out with those friends. Alexa Montez, Nichol's 16-year-old daughter, was born October 8, 2002, in Honolulu, Hawaii, to Nichol and Carlos Montez. She was a sophomore at Clark High School in nearby San Antonio, where she was a cheerleader and excelled in health and science classes. She loved animals and babies, loved serving and volunteering at church, and dreamed of going to Texas A&M and becoming a doctor, specifically an OBGYN. She turned 16 just a few months before her death, and she was making plans with her father to visit Hawaii and go car shopping. 10-year-old London Bribiescus was born February 11, 2008, in San Antonio, Texas, to Nichol and Hector Bribiescus. London was a happy kid who loved monkeys, singing, acting, and painting, and she adored her family and friends, spending as much time with them as possible. Nichol, like many women, had an active Instagram account in 2019, often posting selfies. She was an attractive woman who was always immaculately dressed and meticulously styled and made up. She attracted the attention of a man 6 years her junior named Charlie Wheeler, and he was so taken with her Instagram photos that he sent her a private message. Shortly thereafter, the two were a couple. Charlie was well off. He came from money and used his winnings on the professional rodeo circuit to start a business selling and installing security gates. He sold that company, made a ton of money, and then got into his family's oil and gas business. Eventually, Nichol and her children moved into Charlie's home in Leon Springs, a $1 million house in an exclusive gated community, complete with a pool and a Maserati parked out front. From the outside, Charlie and Nichol looked like the perfect couple. They were both successful, beautiful people with a nice home and nice cars. But according to friends and colleagues, the pair's relationship was rocky, with fights and disagreements increasing in frequency as time passed.
In later interviews, Charlie Wheeler claimed that he and Nichol got into a fight on the evening of January 9th, 2019, and that he left home to go stay the night with either a friend or relative to cool off. I've seen it both ways in articles. The next morning, Charlie claims he tried to call Nichol, but she never answered. He got concerned and returned home at around 9 a.m. on January 10th, only to find Nichol and both girls had been shot to death inside the house. He called 911, and when Bexar County deputies showed up, they found Charlie crying in the front yard and the bodies of 37-year-old Nichol, 16-year-old Alexa, and 10-year-old London inside, already cold to the touch. Deputies noted that there was blood smeared on the walls and floor, and there was a small amount of blood pooled in the doorway of an upstairs bathroom. Deputies took Charlie into custody pretty quickly and relieved him of his wallet and truck for analysis. Investigators didn't find any evidence of forced entry at the home, and if anything came from interviews with the gated community's security staff or camera footage from neighboring properties, it's never been made public. In the days following the discovery of the bodies, the Bexar County medical examiner concluded that Nichole's gunshot wound was self-inflicted and the two girls had been victims of homicide. So initially, anyway, this case was considered a murder-suicide, at least by the medical examiner. Something never really sat right with friends and family members left behind or with law enforcement, and investigators continued to keep an open mind when it came to this case.
Right. Nichole's friends raised the BS flag within days on the suicide claim. Ludden was set to audition for America's Got Talent the day after she died, and she was expecting a visit from her son Skylar in the near future. Suicide seemed a remote possibility, and murdering her daughters was unthinkable. Plus, investigators discovered that someone had used Nichole's phone the night of January 9th to make 5 phone calls. The first was to Charlie's mother at 11:09 p.m., and that call went unanswered. Then there were 4 calls to 911 between 11:10 and 11:12 p.m. 3 of those calls didn't connect, and the 4th was dropped after only a few seconds. It wasn't long enough for dispatchers to determine a location and send first responders, and the sheriff's office brought in the FBI less than 2 weeks after the murders took place. Nichole's boyfriend, Charlie, cooperated with investigators from the start, and he alleged that Nichol had been exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior before her death. That being said, Bexar County Sheriff Javier Salazar was adamant from the start that suicide seemed like a reach. He noted in several interviews that there was no suicide note, and her friends and family didn't mention any behavior that might indicate plans to harm herself or her daughters. She hadn't called any friends to tell them she was depressed, and nobody in her circle came forward to talk about any red flags. All we have is the suggestion that Nichole's behavior was quote-unquote erratic by her boyfriend. That being said, the FBI's involvement in the case didn't turn up any real leads. Charlie Wheeler was a person of interest from the early days, but he has never officially been considered a suspect. The Sheriff's Department has admitted that there are several other persons of interest in this case, though those names are not publicly available. So, from early 2019 to early 2021, the official narrative, at least from the perspective of the Bexar County Medical Examiner, was that this was a straightforward murder-suicide, though the Bexar County Sheriff's Office questions this determination and continued investigating.
In January of 2021, both Alexa and London's respective fathers filed wrongful death lawsuits against Charlie Wheeler. Remember, Charlie claimed that Nichol had been exhibiting quote-unquote erratic behavior the night before. On the night of January 9th, 2019, he supposedly fought with Nichol and then left because of said erratic behavior, but also left an unsecured firearm on his bedside table. This was the crux of both lawsuits. In text messages later released to the public, Charlie tells an acquaintance that Nichol was acting, quote, really strange, and that she had been, quote, on some kind of pills that very evening. Both of the girls' fathers contended that Charlie left his home knowing that Nichol was acting weird and potentially violent, but he didn't take any action to secure his gun or to get the girls to safety. This was supported by other text messages that Charlie sent to Nichol's brother Justin that night that indicated there was some kind of, quote, escalating situation, end quote, happening, and that Charlie needed to, quote, take reasonable measures. Charlie also asked Nichol's brother to check on her and the girls, but Justin replied saying that she wasn't answering any of his calls. Phone records also indicated that Charlie was in contact with 16-year-old Alexa that night, or at least someone was using her phone. Charlie texted Alexa's number saying that he left and that Nichol was worrying him. Alexa, or someone with access to her phone, responded asking, quote, "Are you here? I think she's talking to herself," end quote. And this text also included an emoji that seemed to represent fear. Charlie claimed to be texting and attempting to call Nichol and both girls all night, but when he stopped getting responses, he never contacted the police or the security employees in their gated community. He also didn't physically check on them himself until 9 a.m. the next morning. The house's security system was also not turned on. As far as I know, those lawsuits have not reached a resolution at this point in time.
So again, this is still an open and active investigation. I read somewhere that it has been assigned to a cold case detective, but it's still being worked. The FBI did get involved in the investigation early on, like we mentioned, but they weren't able to provide any more clarity. So that's why it was turned over to a local cold case investigator. We are 6 years into this investigation, and there haven't been any major breakthroughs, which is incredibly frustrating given the circumstances.
So what do we think happened to Nichol, Alexa, and London on that night?
There are 3 main theories here, and honestly, they all make sense to some degree at this point. The first theory is that Nichol did actually kill her 2 daughters before turning the gun on herself. I don't know that I necessarily buy this argument myself, but it is something we need to consider. We do have Charlie claiming that Nichol's behavior was quote-unquote erratic that night, but we don't really know what that means. And if he was truly concerned for everyone's safety, why leave a gun out and leave the kids behind? Why not call 911? Yes, we have evidence that he contacted Nichol's brother that night, but he didn't seem all that concerned either. But he did reach out, so I honestly don't know.
Then you have the text from Alexa's phone. Her response to Charlie when he reached out to her that night seems to indicate that Nichol was experiencing some kind of emotional episode. How common this was, if at all, and how serious this was, I can't tell you though. Then you have the circumstances of the family's life at that time. London was set to audition for America's Got Talent the next day. Alexa was making plans with her father to travel and to buy a car. Nichol had a 22-year-old son that she was planning to meet up with in the very near future. And something we didn't mention earlier was that investigators found emails that indicated Nichol was looking for apartments for herself and the girls. It looked like Nichol was planning on moving out and moving on.
Yes, exactly. Nichol was successful in her own right. She made her own money. She'd lived on her own before. She hadn't lived in Charlie's house that long at this point. One article stated that Charlie had only bought the house a little over a year before this happened. She was making plans to get out. At least that's what it looks like. At the same time, mental health is a funny thing. None of Nichol's family or friends have indicated that she struggled with depression or any other condition that may make suicide more plausible. But not everyone shares their mental health struggles openly with their support system. There's a huge stigma surrounding mental health in this country. Mental health struggles are treated like a normal problem rather than a medical one, and that has devastating effects on the communities and families. People are unwilling to get help for fear of punishment or negative consequences.
And something we didn't mention earlier was that investigators found emails that indicated Nichol was looking for apartments for herself and the girls. It looked like Nichol was planning on moving out and moving on. And this is the U.S. Medical care is expensive here, especially mental health care. Nichol was self-employed, so who knows if she had insurance or at least coverage for mental health care if she needed it. I make good money and have insurance, and if it weren't for the VA, there's no way I could afford the type of health care I need. And I'm not a single mom with 2 kids still in the house, possibly facing a breakup and moving into a new home. We know Charlie mentioned in a text that he thought Nichol may have taken some kind of pills, and that could have contributed to her state of mind that night. So that's something else to consider. We don't have any record of her being on any medication, but that doesn't mean a whole lot. Had she recently been prescribed some kind of medication and she was experiencing side effects? Some SSRIs and other mental health medications do have suicidal ideation and hallucinations and other kind of mental health experiences as side effects. Though I feel like maybe I'm reaching a little bit here, but maybe not. I've had some crazy reactions to medications in my day. Was she self-medicating, as many people do? And if so, did she just take too much? We just don't know.
You can also consider statistics here. 70% of women who die of suicide do not use guns. Obviously, women do use guns some of the time. It's just not that common. Also, while women can absolutely be family annihilators, it is rare. And it usually involves women suffering from postpartum depression or postpartum psychosis. Nichole's daughters were 16 and 10, so that wasn't the case here. It's also rare for female family annihilators to use guns, though again, it does happen. In this case, it does appear from the information we have that guns were readily available in this home. So if this was a murder-suicide, then it could be a matter of availability. The gun was there, so that's what was used. Again, I'm not entirely convinced that this was a murder-suicide. There are too many other factors that make this less plausible for me. Having future plans for herself and her kids, touring rentals, the lack of anecdotal evidence from her closest friends and family. The notion of suicide was a shock to them, and the thought of Nichol murdering her own children was absolutely unthinkable.
So the next theory is that Charlie was involved in some way. Investigators obviously think this is plausible since he's always been a person of interest, so we have to consider it here. We don't really know a whole lot about Charlie Wheeler outside of what we mentioned earlier, and it's important to note that Nichole's friends and family didn't know a whole lot about him either. Both Alexa and London's fathers indicated that they also didn't know much about him. Charlie had never bothered to reach out and introduce himself to either of them. All we really have to go on here is the fact that investigators have taken a good look at Charlie, and some mentions by friends and family that the pair fought quite a bit. Of course, looking at photos and posts from social media is deceiving. Very few people actually post their dirty laundry on social media. It's usually a carefully curated selection of selfies and dates and positive things. There wasn't any indication, as far as I'm aware, that things were going south on anyone's social media, or that Nichol was suffering from depression or suicidal ideation, or anything that ties back to our first theory.
What we do know is that Charlie admits to fighting with Nichol on the evening of January 9th. And he claims the fight was bad enough for him to leave the house and spend the night somewhere else. We also know that when Charlie returned home the next morning, and when the sheriff's department showed up shortly thereafter, the bodies of Nichol and her children were already cold to the touch and rigor had set in. I don't have any information on estimated time of death. Remember, this is still an active investigation. Nor do we know what time exactly Charlie supposedly left home. We know that Charlie reached out to Nichol's brother to tell him about the fight, but was that sincere? Or was he trying to establish an alibi or deflect? I've also seen it mentioned in several articles that Charlie claimed to have tried texting and calling Nichol later that same evening, but got no response. He did reach Alexa, or at least someone using Alexa's phone, but she eventually stopped responding as well. He returned to his home the next morning at around 9 a.m. Personally, if I was concerned about the safety of my family, I would have raced home or called the cops as soon as Alexa sent that text indicating she was scared. So it strikes me as odd that he was concerned, but he waited so long to check on them. And again, they lived in a gated community with 24-hour on-site security. He could have had a security guard to go knock on the door at the very least. I don't know, it just seems odd to me. But again, maybe he's just clueless or a jerk. Being a clueless jerk doesn't necessarily mean you are a murderer.
And I've seen several articles mention the fact that when deputies showed up, they took note of the fact that while Charlie was hysterical on the front lawn, he wasn't actually crying. No tears were visible. I honestly think people make way too much of these types of things, but I did want to bring it up in light of all the other weird things that have happened. People react in all sorts of strange ways to trauma and shock. In any case, this is a guy who came home to find his family dead. Unless you've been in that situation, you have no idea how you'd react. It's so far out of the realm of normal human experience. I'm not trying to give the guy a pass here, I'm just giving my perspective. In the years since this happened, Charlie sold the property and moved to Austin.
So that brings us to the third theory, which is that this is a triple homicide, but it was perpetrated by someone else. Charlie Wheeler is apparently far from the only person of interest here. He's just the most prominent one, being that he was in a relationship with Nichol and they shared a home. But investigators identified multiple persons of interest starting early on in the investigation. We don't have any real insight into who these people might be, since this is an active investigation, but I do find it interesting that there are multiple people on law enforcement's radar. Did Nichol have enemies that might want to do her harm? Did Charlie? I don't know. I know that law enforcement did look at footage from neighborhood security cameras, so maybe they saw something that they haven't disclosed publicly. There was no sign of forced entry into the home, but we also know that the security system wasn't armed. Maybe there's evidence that someone simply knocked on the door or let themselves inside without resistance. We don't know. This was a gated community, so I'm assuming you needed a code or a key card or something similar to get into the subdivision. That's not to say that you couldn't piggyback through the gate or could have gotten the code from someone else who lived there. It's just another layer to the mystery.
And it honestly does make it seem less likely that it was a third person or unknown murderer. If you have to navigate extra security measures like a security gate, it makes it seem like it was someone that at least knew of or had beef with Nichol. It would be a lot of extra risk for someone looking to commit a random burglary or other crime.
I agree with you on that point. Also, it was a huge house. I think I read somewhere that it was almost 4,500 square feet on 3 acres and normally did have a pretty serious security system enabled. Door and window alarms, video surveillance, the works. It seems risky that a serial killer or a random person would risk walking around a huge house looking for victims. Our house is half that size, and the logistics would be difficult here in my opinion, especially with a split floor plan and multiple floors. To me, if this was a triple murder, it was perpetrated by someone Nichol knew or someone that at least knew of her.
Agreed. If you have any information regarding the deaths of Nichol Olsen, Alexa Montez, and London Berbiescus on the night of January 9th or early morning hours of January 10th, 2019, please contact the Bexar County Sheriff's Office at 210-335-6000. That's 210-335-6000.
We are excited to announce that we are now a part of the Darkcast Network. Darkcast Network, the best in indie podcasts. Check out all the great shows at darkcastnetwork.com.
Grab your marshmallows and sleeping bags for the Burnt Marshmallows podcast, where cozy mysteries come alive around the crackling campfire. Picture yourself wrapped in a warm blanket, sipping hot cocoa as we share spooky tales that will whisk you away to a world of mystery, ghosts, and perhaps even an occasional monster. Crime-solving spirits, urban legends, Bigfoot, we've got it all. Join Burnt Marshmallows every Tuesday, wherever you listen to podcasts for cozy mysteries.
Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the podcast creators, host, and guest. If you think bringing unsolved cases is important, then please take a moment to rate and review our podcast. Also, please like and follow our pages on all social media platforms for Box in the Basement Podcasts and Justice for Leon Laurelis. You can now also find us on YouTube. If you like what you hear, please do us a favor and subscribe. It would help so much, my lovelies. Also, please share this episode so we can bring awareness to these lesser-known cases so we can reach more people in hopes that someone who may know something will come forward. I'd like to ask that you sign my petition for my Uncle Leon Laurelis' case to be reopened and reviewed with fresh eyes. And you can find our petition on change.org. This podcast has a bigger purpose than just providing information and entertainment. The Homicide Victims' Families' Rights Act is a bipartisan bill that was signed into law by Congress in 2021, and we want to see it put into action. This law establishes a systematic process for reviewing case files related to cold case murders. The focus is on providing a mechanism for the families and friends of murder victims to request a formal review of such cases. Thank you for joining us. Be kind. Later, Gators.